Let me ask a question here. How do you rank these businesses? Energy, Optimus, trucking, ride sharing. Energy, Optimus, the robot, trucking, ride hailing. Rank those, your number 1 or 2 in terms of potential for Tesla Chamath. Round the horn.
It's a good question.
Ride sharing
Is number 1.
The absolute, probably by an order of magnitude. And
interesting.
the reason I say that is in order for ride sharing and ride hailing to really work the way that they envision it, you will have level 5 autonomy supported in jurisdictions where, again, if you just look at part 2, the whole point is you can summon a car from your app. And if you don't have access to a mobile phone, you can go to these bus stop equivalents and just press a button and the car comes to you. And so in that world, there's just so much value add in terms of passenger safety and sustainability for the environment and less traffic. It's a gargantuan game changer. Meanwhile,
what's your number 2?
Just to contrast, Uber and Lyft seemingly are profitable because they find pricing power to raise prices. So if Tesla enters in as a third player in that field and just guts pricing, which I think would make sense for them to do, I think this thing is just gangbusters nuclear.
That's a really interesting point.
What do you got, Sachs? Going around the horn here.
Well, I already said Optimus, but that's based on a long-term view.
Yeah, this is a long-term question. Based on the long term, 1 and 2.
In the long term, in terms of option value, I am the most intrigued by the robot play. And Elon has pointed out that once you have robots that are capable of doing lots of different jobs, pretty much any job you point them at, that we could have more robots on Earth than humans. So it's a big future market.
So you got Optimus number 1, and who's number 2?
I agree with Chamath in the short term that ride sharing could really reach its logical conclusion with robotaxis. Remember when Uber first gained steam and people were speculating about how big the market could be, there was a lot of giddy talk about how car ownership would change and you wouldn't need to buy a car anymore because you would just use Uber all the time.
We called it going full Uber.
Yeah. And I went full Uber, or I shouldn't say full. I went mostly Uber, within a couple of years of discovering
you were one of the
that
first,
product. Yeah. So I thought the potential was there, but the problem is it was just too expensive. I mean, Uber is still quite expensive, and the most expensive piece of it is the human driving the car. It's all that labor cost. So if you're able to charge for the ride purely based on fractionalizing the CapEx, and that CapEx isn't even that high because they're making these robotaxis pretty cheaply now. And you're able to get so much more utilization out of a car.
Exactly.
Right? Because, how many hours a day do you drive your own car? An hour, maybe?
Less.
But a robotaxi...
90%, I think, is the number on average that they're not used. Freeberg, who's your 1 and 2?
I think the Optimus has the highest alpha, but the highest beta. So, more upside than anything else. Just unclear how you get there, what the path is and the capital requirements. And I think there's going to be a lot of commoditization in this space. But the ride sharing is built in, it's low beta and significant alpha. So
you're 1 and 2 Optimus rideshare.
Yeah, Optimus rideshare.
Chamath, what was your number 2 again? Just so I can recap here.
I would actually probably pick energy.
And why would you pick energy as your number 2 after ride hailing?
I think it's a pretty obvious disruption so today in America, if you look at the energy infrastructure, the utilities keep raising rates. And they keep raising rates independent of what it costs to generate energy. There are 1,700 utilities in America. They are, by law, obligated to spend, I think in the next 10 years, about $2 trillion on CapEx. They will pass all of those costs, plus a margin, to consumers, even though in these next 10 years, the cost of generating an incremental unit of energy will be essentially free. So I think the very disruptive play is to take 100 million homes and make them mini utilities.
Say more.
And
what does it mean, make them utilities? Yeah.
You go to a website, Again, the biggest investment I've made is in a company called Palmetto. They are close to now the largest residential solar business in the United States, if not the largest already. Now, what do they do? You're a consumer. You can go and lease or buy. It doesn't really matter. And we give you a super cheap system that goes on top of your roof, plus a battery system. And all of a sudden, you're totally resilient and independent of the utilities. And we help change the laws so that every time you have excess energy, you can put it back into the grid and get paid, which is called net metering. So if you have 100 million of these mini utilities competing against 1,700 incumbents that are forced to make huge investments and are mispriced, that's an upheaval of an enormous amount of market cap, but also an enormous amount of debt. There's like trillions of dollars of debt. So I've always thought a ginormous directional bet to make would be to go long the disruptor. The person that helps arm the rebels in this case would be the person that arms 100 million homes. And then eventually at some point just short the debt of these utilities because they won't be able to service them if enough people quit and don't need PG&E and everybody else. It'll be just massively, massively disruptive. So that's why I think that market could be big. I like the Optimus market. The only thing that I'll say is in my experience, when I've looked at these generalized robots, the conclusion that I came to, and I could be totally wrong, is I suspect instead of having a generalized robot, you have very specific use case robots that look differently. So for example, there's an example, Nick, you can throw a picture, but there's something called intuitive surgical, which is essentially a robot that operates on you. And if you look at that, it doesn't look anything like what you would think a robot would look like. It just looks like a ginormous machine. And so I suspect that there will be people that become experts in these vertical use cases, and that will limit the TAM for a generalized approach. I could be totally wrong, but that's sort of why I rank them the way I rank them. But I'm pretty convinced that robotaxis are number one, and then this energy thing that upends these 1,700 utilities in America is number two.
All right, J. Cal, you were the third investor in Uber. Are you worried about your investment? As I understand it, you still haven't sold, have you?
I've sold slightly more than the majority of my holdings over the years, 2 private transactions, and then I held everything post going public. And I'm still long Uber. I give number one to Optimus by far and away because I think the build of materials on Optimus could be 10K or less. I looked at some of these other startups that are in the space, and I've been studying it a little bit just out of curiosity. And so at a 10K bomb, I think they could rent you one of these for $300 a month or something like that, a subscription. I think every human on planet Earth eventually will have a robot. So I know that's crazy, but I think Optimus will dwarf the entirety of Tesla's other businesses. Number 2 is energy, clearly. I think, and number 3 is ride hailing. Number 2, energy, fairly obvious what's happening here. If you look at what's happening with data centers, it spiked, I think, from like 3 or 4% of energy now to like, is it 15%, Chamath? I think we had a discussion with Phil Deutsch.
I think it's 18%. It's almost 20%. It's a huge number now.
Okay, so we dovetail the two stories together. These H100s are beasts, cooling beasts. This is like, you can't even, Phil Deutsch was telling us in the group chat, like you can't even cool some of these places. And what that means is there's going to be demand for energy. To Chamath's point, if each home becomes a little provider, it's going to create some regulation change. I believe, I'm no expert on the regulations. We should definitely have Deutsch on the pod at some point to talk about this. But imagine these, like in Texas, they keep having the grids go down. And in Australia, they have the grids go down. It's going to be so annoying for consumers to have the grids go down while demand spikes for data centers. All the regulations are going to get opened up to put batteries and solar everywhere.
It's also dangerous. I mean, people die when these blackouts and outages occur. And also, like we saw in San Carlos here in the Bay Area, nat gas lines explode. PG&E is responsible for forest fires. I mean, if you can do your part to basically get off these grids, use somebody like Palmetto or somebody else and just get solar, Tesla, and be done with it. And at least you're not contributing to some of these downstream errors.
Yeah. And so I agree 100%. And by the way, if you can make money from your solar and your batteries, and somebody else picks up the cost of installation, I think there's some arbitrage here, Chamath, to be had. And I think that's like what you discovered when you did your first principle approach to this. So I think those two businesses will be far bigger than anything else they're doing. Now, on ride hailing, I'm using FSD 12. I have been using autopilot. I was one of the first users of autopilot, from the beginning, like literally. And FSD 12 is a significant improvement. That being said, all of these systems work really well in a controlled grid, like we've seen with Waymo in Arizona and in, limited parts of Los Angeles and San Francisco. I think that vision is 5, 6, 7 years out from having low single-digit percentages. And you may have seen Uber has incorporated Waymo and the taxis in London into their system. I think Uber's ultimately going to be the place people go to call up one of 20 different self-driving. I think a lot of people are going to get there at the same time. Wouldn't be surprised if Elon gets there first. But I think that's 5 or 10 years out, if I'm being totally honest, in terms of getting to scale. So I would never, ever bet against Elon seeing what he's done.
Wait a second. When are you saying that self-driving will be good enough to power just one robotaxi? Let's just forget about the scale. Just like, when will it be good enough to have like a steering wheel free car?
Yeah. So if you can just look at Cruise and Waymo and you can have your answer, which is today in a contained environment with remote drivers intervening on some regular basis, it works. So people are taking Waymo, San Francisco, LA on a pretty regular basis. Cruise, I think, got kicked out of San Francisco. But if in the Cruise data, there was a lot of interventions going on. I suspect Waymo's doing a lot of interventions. So I think...
I don't want to be a proponent of this, by the way, but bleep out his name, was saying that, Jason, with FSD, they're very strict that you have to be holding the steering wheel and stuff.
Yes.
But you can go to Alibaba and buy something that hacks that, right?
It's a weight. A lot of
I'm
people
not promoting that.
This.
I'm not promoting this.
No.
I'm not promoting this. I'm just saying that it does
So anyway,
exist.
to answer your question, Sachs, I think today, or let's just say by the end of this year, an FSD 12 could be operating in a constrained space, just like Waymo is. Now, to get it to all regions, back roads, weather, there's a lot of edge cases here. So I think the more important question is, when can automated be 5% of rides or 10% of rides? And I think that's 5 or 10 years from now. I do think a couple of people will reach that moment at the same time.
Well, let me show you a video. This is one of my coworkers at Kraft took this. This wasn't me, but he was riding in the back of one of these robotaxis. I think this is San Francisco or New York. I'm not sure which one.
Mm-hmm.
But there is no one in the driver's seat.
Yeah, but there's a safety driver watching this remote, I believe, which is what Cruise was doing. And then when they get to a point where they can't figure it out, the human comes in, intervenes.
I don't see a safety driver. Where's the safety driver?
No, a remote safety driver.
Remote. But I have to say, watching this video, that is the coolest bloody thing. I mean, this is amazing. I'll be honest.
I think it's underrated in terms of how significant this is going to be.
Me too.
Yeah,
I totally
look,
agree
if
with you.
this is a Jaguar, look at that. It's a Jaguar.
Yeah.
So you're telling me that Tesla's not going to have something at least as good as this
better
soon?
Yeah,
exactly. I think they have it already. If you drive FSD 12, I believe FSD 12 probably could be working today in San Francisco under a controlled grid with the remote drivers like the other people have. If somebody knows about this, by the way, can they send us information? I'm Jason at calacanis.com for life. Just send me a picture. I'll keep it on the DL. I won't reveal sources of who these remote drivers are, what their setup looks like. I'm very curious to understand how the remote drivers work for Waymo and Cruise.
Can they park the car?
They can take the car with a joystick, is my understanding, and move it around a garbage can in the middle of the street, Jamal.
Wow.
And that might be the future of this. Like, let's say 10 or 15%. Let's say 10% of the time it needs an intervention. 1 an hour, 2 an hour. Having some remote person in Manila, wherever, watching 10 videos concurrently and looking for moments to do this.
It's incredible.
Cruise workers intervened to help the company's cars every 2.5 to 5 miles, according to a New York Times article. All right, and just if we score everybody's rating here, I give 2 points for first place, 1 point for second place. Optimus got 6 points, ride hailing 4, energy 2, trucking 0. There you have it, folks. There's your scores from the Besties.
What is Waymo? What is that? Is that like Uber
That's
and Lyft?
Google self-driving. They spun it out.
But what is it? Is it like
LiDAR,
a service?
$150,000 cars.
Uh-huh.
And,
But it competes with Cruise?
yeah, they're doing what Cruise did.
It was the original self-driving car company that Google set up, and then they set up Google X around it. And
No, just explain to me the market, guys. I'm not sure I get it. So there's Waymo and
it's
Cruise.
Uber. Yeah.
But there's Waymo and Cruise, which are like, there's no drivers. And then there's Uber and Lyft, where there are drivers.
Yeah.
That's the basic, right? Is that?
Yeah.
That's right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's also Aurora. I don't know if Uber owns a percentage of that or not, but I think you know about Aurora.
Aurora was set up by Chris Urmson. He was the original engineering lead on Waymo inside of Google. When they did a management changeover, there was a big falling out. A lot of people ended up leaving the Waymo program. Chris left, took a bunch of people with him, and started Aurora, which was basically software to do autonomous driving that they were then going to license into OEMs. So that company got backed by a bunch of VCs and ended up going public via SPAC, and it's publicly traded today.
Ah, I see.
Yeah.
Uber owns 26% of Aurora. Or actually now it's down to 20%. There's also Zoox.
They made an investment in it. Yeah.
There's also Zoox, which is part of Amazon. So I think there's about 10 people who are going to get to the finish line at the same time. I think it's going to be a very crowded space.
But again, some of these guys are trying to make software for OEMs so that the OEMs don't have to build their own autonomous platform. Mm-hmm. And some of them are trying to make a driving service like Waymo. And then some of them are like Tesla has a driving car. They actually sell cars. So different models.
Yeah.
See, but they're all going to converge. Yeah.
I actually disagree that there's going to be 20 or 30 of these, because I actually think that self-driving is really, really hard. And we know that Tesla has been spending years getting to this point, and then Google as well. So I'm not sure why there'd be more than 2 or 3 companies that can do self-driving.
There are 10 or more pursuing it. I do agree it goes down to 4 or 5. And then it's a question of, is it a winner take all, winner take most? And that's what remains to be seen.
But I mean, you need a ton of data to make it work, and you need a lot of data around edge cases. And so the advantage Tesla has is they actually have
so
real
many cars on the road. Yeah.
They have real cars on the road with real driver minutes, and with drivers using the previous version of FSD and making interventions. So they're constantly getting better. I think Google seems to be putting enough resources into this to get somewhere, but I don't think a lot of companies are going to figure this out. I think it's going to be somewhere between 1 and 3 companies figure this out.
Well, Waymo has the most on the road right now. I think Cruise is second to them in terms of in market. So the question is, how quickly can Elon get this out?
Have you guys, any of you guys taken one of these robotaxis?
I haven't taken one.
No, that's one of my coworkers.
Yeah. We got to do
Freeberg,
that.
have you taken one?
Yeah, they're cool. They just move around.
You did take one.
Like, yeah, they're all over the city. You can take them in San Francisco now.
Yeah.
You have to download the Waymo app?
Yeah, and there's like a wait list, and then you get on it, and they're letting people on, and then you just get on it and go for a ride. Pretty cool.
By the way, someone tweeted something kind of funny. They said, it took Uber years and years and like $1 trillion to finally get to profitability, and now they're about to get disrupted by robotaxis. This is brutal.
Yeah. Unlikely. I think unlikely. I think it's going to be a very slow rollout. 1 or 2% a year. So, but it compounds, and so we'll see.